views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
There's no magic bullet. You're not going to find some brand new tax that nobody has ever heard of.
Tonight on Politics Now, making the budget work. With the legislature just days away, Democratic State Senator Mo Dennis tells us where the money will come from. Plus,
we need to have all branches of the government. We shouldn't have one branch dictating everything.
Having more say, House Senate Minority Leader James Settlemeyer wants to give the legislature more power over pandemic-related decisions. And
by December 31st, 1.5 million claims were filed.
Making Dieter better. Recommendations from the team tasked with changing our unemployment system.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
Thank you for joining us. I'm John Langler. The 2021 legislative session starts on Monday. It comes as the state grapples with a pandemic, massive budget shortfall, and sky-high unemployment. While lawmakers, their staff, and journalists will be in Carson City, the public can only take part virtually. You can only comment on Zoom or other online forums or through email, for example. Members of the public will not be allowed into the Capitol building until vaccines are given to the lawmakers and staff. So, what are the top priorities in this session? Several lawmakers say it's economic development and education. Last week we interviewed people from the Assembly, the leadership. This week we're tackling the Senate. We start with Democrat Mo Dennis, who is the president pro tempore.
Let's talk education. The funding formula obviously has been a major issue that you have been touting for a long time. What are the chances that that gets fully implemented during this session?
So, I mean, we're going to look at that. I'm trying to understand what the governor's proposing in his proposal. It's very important for us to implement this new funding formula. It's transparent, makes it easy for everybody to understand where the money's going, and it focuses education funding on education. So I think we all have that goal to make sure that that happens, and that's what we're working towards.
But I guess in the hierarchy of priorities specific to education, given the circumstances with the pandemic, just getting kids back in class, where does finishing the funding formula adjustments, where does that fit on your priority scale?
Well, I think that's the number one thing we need to do. Keep in mind, the funding formula is not about how much money we're putting into education, it's how we allocate it. And having a transparent funding formula that allows us to, I mean, even if we're just looking at it and we want to make adjustments, it's very easy under the new formula to make those adjustments.
How much of a fight over money is there going to be this legislative session compared with all other ones? It's always a bit of a dogfight up there. There's not endless supplies of funding to go around. But when everyone gets together and you start to talk, how much of a scramble is it going to be?
Well, I think everybody is anticipating that we're not going to have any extra money, and we've got what we have, and I think people are more understanding as we get up there. I don't think there's a lot of proposals. I don't think people have a lot of proposals that are going to require a lot of extra money.
What are some other measures, some other issues that you hope to tackle or put your support behind when the session starts?
Well, definitely one of the things that, in addition to all the issues that, education and the pandemic has pointed out in education and inequities, I think economic development needs to be another huge issue that we need to tackle. We need to find ways to expand. The way that we currently bring in revenues for the state is very limited. There's only certain ways you can do that. So the only way you're really going to increase revenues is to change our economy in a way that we're bringing in additional revenues from, we're so dependent on tourism, gaming. We've got to find other ways to bring other industries so that, when we have a pandemic like we do right now, tourism's the first thing to go, and it's usually the last thing to come back.
It seems, though, that Nevada needs some short-term fixes. Is there anything short-term that the legislature can do besides wait for federal funding?
As far as increasing, right now, any short-term things would have to be things like making sure that we're that the internet, for example, things that are purchased on the internet, that we're getting those sales tax revenues. That's something that could be more immediate. Any adjustments that we would want to make to any of the existing taxes could bring more that way. But this is a tough time to look at those issues and see what we can do more in the immediate. So things like, trying to figure out ways that we can save and maybe do things more efficiently.
Now, Senator Dennis, of course, was one of the driving forces behind the change to a weighted school funding formula here in Nevada. That's where the money follows the student instead of being allocated to specific schools. Senate Minority Leader James Settlemyre also says education is his #1 priority. He wants to make students are back in class first.
Your thoughts on how his proposal is going to play in the legislature when the rubber meets the road?
I feel that since the party in charge is also the party of the governor, I think that they will go along with his budget, and I think it'll sail along pretty good. I worry a little bit about the concept is very optimistic that we're only going to be 2% down on revenue. I think, as always, it doesn't matter what anyone says at this point in time. It really comes down to that final economic forum number, because that establishes the amount of money that we'll have to spend.
How much unity you believe there can be on just a statewide level between people who are maybe Republican and Democrat, and then also in the legislative session, how much unity do you think there can be that achieved when you're up there trying to get laws passed, trying to navigate the budget, trying to work on all these important issues? Because I get the sense in your voice that there's frustration that still lingers from what we've just been through.
People are people. They're great. The issue is sometimes that parties choose to put certain individuals forth in leadership positions that unfortunately sometimes can be pathologically partisan. And that's the real problem. We need to do what's right for the state of Nevada. And as far as the issue of what's happened in previous sessions, yeah, there's some bad blood. Things were forced down the minority party, told, you're just going to take it. We don't care about you. However, if you look at the holistic approach, 95% of bills pass in a bipartisan way.
What are some of the other main issues that you would like to address when you're in Carson City at the session? Big topics. There's a lot of things to deal with.
We need to get the state back up and running. Education needs to be dealt with. We need the kids back in school. I know that sounds crazy, but if you look across the state, we only have one county that hasn't gone back to school. That's a problem. And they're clamoring that they need to get the shot. Well, teachers in Northern Nevada went back to school without a shot. And so we need to figure out how to get these kids back in a productive environment. When the kids aren't in school, it makes it very difficult for the parents to go to work every day. So to me, that's the main focus, is the education of the children of the state of Nevada. And the way to do that is to get them back into the classrooms. The other thing is I believe we need some guardrails on Chapter 414 in Nevada Revised Statute that gives the governor complete power to do this type of thing without discussion with the legislature. We need to have all branches of the government. We shouldn't have one branch dictating everything. It should have to go through the legislature and through the judicial branches in order to make sure that we have a balanced form of government.
The issue of changing the funding formula kind of got hesitated, slowed down because of the pandemic and a variety of other things. Do you envision that being revisited, and what concerns do you still have over changing how education is funded and how the pocket of money is dealt with?
Well, obviously, the formula on the budget, and that one was not a Republican versus a Democrat issue in any way, shape, or form. It did end up being a little bit of North versus South, rural versus metropolises. And that's just a reality due to mining funds and the way the Constitution was written. Do I imagine we're going to have tweaks to it? Absolutely. Every session we've tweaked with the amount of money going to education, whether it be rural, whether it be urban, whether it's north versus south. Doesn't matter. We've always tweaked with that formula to try to create a better balance, and we will continue to.
We also spoke with Senator Settlemyre about how he thinks the legislative session should run essentially the way the state is being run right now. If businesses can have 25% capacity, he believes the legislature should have people be able to testify in person as well with that 25% capacity. You can watch the full interviews as well as ones we've done earlier with Assembly Speaker Jason Frierson and Republican Assembly Deputy Floor Leader Tom Roberts on 8newsnow.com. Just look for politics under the News tab. On Tuesday, the Clark County Commission picks replacements for 2 open seats in the legislature. They're both going to be Democrats, and they have to, of course, live in the districts they would represent. This week, commissioners revealed who applied for the Assembly District 42 seat in Spring Valley. That was left open after Alex Acefa resigned. Metro Police recommended charges against Acefa in a campaign finance scandal, but those charges have not actually been filed. 6 people applied for the seat. They include Opportunity Village executive Tracy Marie Brown May and Jack Abisher III. His company owns several restaurants and other commercial real estate. In 2019, Nevada became the first state with a female majority legislature, and now it is becoming a female-dominated legislature. About 2/3 of the Assembly are women, while the Senate is split right down the middle. Overall, this year's legislature is more than 60% female. Coming up next on Politics Now, fixing unemployment. The legislature looking to make changes at Dieter. We're going to take a look at the recommendations from a task force trying to get people paid and fight fraud.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Governor Steve Sisolak wants to make sure Nevada gets its fair share of federal grant dollars. He says the state is leaving millions of dollars on the table every year. During a roundtable discussion, local nonprofits said the biggest hurdle was knowing what grants they're eligible for and then applying for them correctly. Governor Sisolak wants to create a state office to just do that.
This is a change of perspective in terms of how we do business. This isn't a one-shot deal to try to restore some cuts that we've got coming up this session, and there are some cuts. The Assemblywoman comes up with a bill and we can change the infrastructure and the foundation to open up the spigot and get more money coming on a long-term regular basis for you guys to put out in the community. That's what we're looking to do.
Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno is writing a bill to create that office. It would be a cabinet-level position answering to the governor. Another plan is to create funding for smaller nonprofits to take grant-writing courses over at UNLV. A task force looking into Nevada's unemployment system has finished its work. It was a volunteer role for former Assembly Speaker Barbara Buckley. This week she provided recommendations for Dieter moving forward while addressing the current obstacles that it still faces. Joe Moeller looks at the work that needs to be done.
By December 31st, 1.5 million claims were filed.
Thursday, Dieter announced the Rapid Response Strike Force leader, Barbara Buckley, will no longer be helping the department.
When the strike force began, there were 245,765 claims in the backlog.
Thousands of claims still remain in the backlog.
With the current processing rate of 5,000 a week, the welfare staff can clear this remainder by February 7th.
Thousands are still waiting to have their appeals heard as well, something they say they are getting through and adding 10 staff to help next week.
Take the week of January 11th, 723 appeals were reviewed. 568 were either redetermined and paid, the appeal was withdrawn, or it was determined not to be a valid appeal, leaving 155 to be scheduled.
When the extension of benefits was added, many people were left without their money. The department is working on what extension comes first.
We are still working out with the Department of Labor what the sequence is of how you get your PEUC weeks and then go to state extended benefit weeks, because we have to get the order right.
Dieter is updating computer programs, working on phone problems, and implementing new fraud-fighting tools. The director says they know many are falling victim to fraud, especially with the Bank of America debit cards. She says every day they send claims to the bank to be reinstated, but the bank is now behind.
We are working on resolving that. And my understanding right now is that Bank of America does have a backlog in terms of unfreezing cards.
Joe Moeller, 8 News Now.
Several state lawmakers say modernizing the computers and software at Dieter this session is a priority. Right now, there are 4 separate bill draft requests addressing unemployment in the system here in Nevada. Coming up next on Politics Now, will helping the climate hurt jobs? Alexander Limon will join us to break down the executive orders signed by the Biden administration this week.
You're watching Politics Now.
Energy Secretary nominee Jennifer Granholm says the Biden administration, will focus on green jobs. She also told the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee that she opposes using Yucca Mountain to store nuclear waste. Nevada Senator Catherine Cortez Masto sits on that committee. Granholm is the former governor of Michigan. The Biden administration says it will take decisive and immediate action to combat climate change. The president announced several executive orders to clean energy and lower emissions. The Biden administration's plan will also focus on low-income communities across the country, where high emissions increase asthma and cancer rates.
It creates both a White House interagency task force to address environmental justice, as well as an advisory council. It directs the Department of Health and Human Services to create an Office of Climate Change and Health Equity.
The Biden team says it will offset job losses in the oil and gas industry by transitioning the workforce to the clean energy sector. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Alexander Limon joining us now to talk about the string of executive actions taken by President Biden since he's taken office. Let's start with climate change, several orders that deal with the environment, although some of them have already raised concerns, including with members of his own party.
Yeah, President Biden released this massive climate change plan that included signing those executive orders. And the plan does a lot of things, for example, banning oil and gas drilling and exploration on federal lands. It also creates an interagency task force to deal with climate change, and actually a lot of new positions and offices throughout the general government to deal with climate change and climate injustice. So the Biden team also really wants to focus on helping low-income and minority communities, because a lot of times we see the worst pollution and impacts of climate change on those neighborhoods, and it's very hard for them to get out of that. But part of the problem is that this entire climate change plan is going to cost about $2 trillion. This obviously coming at a time when we're already spending so much money dealing with the pandemic. And then also there are concerns that it could cost a lot of jobs in the oil, gas, and auto industry. Now, the Biden administration is trying to push back on that, saying we're already paying a ton of money to deal with the impacts of climate change. For example, the raging wildfires that get worse and worse out west every year, and also the hurricanes that get worse. They say it would actually cost less money, according to the Biden team, to deal with trying to mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Another series of issues, or a couple of them actually, the president signed executive orders dealing with health care, racial equality. There's a lot of them that he signed since he took office. What are some of the other highlights and how things move forward from here?
So basically this was executive order week. Every single day President Biden came out and signed executive orders on one topic or another. So racial equality, that was one day, and he directed, this was a big one, he directed the Justice Department to phase out and end contracts with private for-profit prisons, because we know that the prison system, and especially the for-profit prison system, negatively impacts and disproportionately impacts communities of color. So that was one thing. He also directed the Department of Housing and Urban Development to try to deal with some of these historic and systemic issues that we see that prevent Black and Hispanic and other minority communities from buying their first home. And, and President Biden talked about, that prevents them from building equity and ever being able to build generational wealth like we see, white counterparts do.
And that was Alexander Limon reporting from Washington, D.C. Coming up next on Politics Now, Nevada doesn't have a lottery. Why is that? You're watching Politics Now. Well, there were long lines for Powerball and Mega Millions jackpots across the country, but not here in Nevada. So why doesn't Nevada have the lottery? We certainly have plenty of other gambling. Well, it was actually outlawed in the original Nevada state constitution passed in 1864. And since then, plenty of bills to remove that language have been written, but they've all died a very quick death. The closest attempt was in 2009. It was passed by the state assembly, but it failed in the Senate. Since it's in the Constitution, this kind of measure would have to pass both houses in Carson City in 2 consecutive sessions and then get approved in a general election ballot. It was done through an initiative petition that would need to go on 2 straight general election ballots. Essentially, it's a long road. Here's a look at what to watch. Because we mentioned earlier, the 2021 legislative session starts in Carson City on Monday. There are new rules because of the coronavirus. People will have to give their public comment on bills either online or via a Zoom link for now. Those links will be on the Nevada Legislature webpage. We at 8 News Now are going to have a crew in Carson City for the beginning of the session. 2 members of the legislature still need to be chosen. The Clark County Commission votes on replacements for the State Senate District 10 seat and Assembly District 42. That selection will be on Tuesday. Both of those seats will go to Democrats. That'll do it for us this week here on Politics Now. Thank you very much for joining us. Stay up to date with us on 8newsnow.com. To check back with you later.